Good evening. Hello, everybody. My name is Rania, and I'm a parent of in El Marino. I'm a parent of 2 children currently in El Marino, and one who has graduated from El Marino and soon from middle school. I'm a member of Advocates for Cleaner Air, El Marino. We are a group of parents and teachers that are dedicated to researching and advocating for ways to improve the quality of the air that our children, our teachers, our parents, our staff breathe while they are at school. I want to thank you all for attending tonight. I know it's a busy week for a lot of us, and I want to particularly thank Ms. Nancy Goldberg, one of our Culver City school board member. Thank you for being with us tonight. We will be showing to you guys a movie, a documentary. It's a signature film by the Air Quality Management District. It presents compelling stories from those who have been affected by air pollution, particularly in Los Angeles. So it is stories that are from right here in LA. We are very fortunate to have 2 expert scientists in the field of air pollution. They are with us tonight, Dr. Philip Fine from the Air Quality Management District, and he is standing back there. Also, we have scientists from UCLA, Dr. Yifan Su. She comes to us from the School of Public Health, Department of Environmental Health Sciences at UCLA. At the end of the screening of the documentary that we will show you, we will have a question and answer discussion session with both Dr. Fine and Dr. Zhu. I want to invite you and encourage you to think of as many questions as you possibly can. Tonight is for all of us to learn, to be informed, to find out, and we couldn't have better speakers and guests with us to help us learn and find out more. I also want to take a moment to thank Ms. Kathy Paspalis, who's also from our school board, who just came in. Thank you for attending. And with that, we can start a documentary movie. It is not long. Enjoy. Thank you.
Invariably all compliant because they move.
And how does that affect air quality in the basin?
I spent 50 years of my life with a heavyweight champion of the world. Everywhere he went, everybody knew him. Everybody wanted to touch him and talk to him. While the President of the United States or the President of Russia was trying to get his attention, he was picking up a baby or a young person and touching them and talking to them and empathizing with them. That's what made him a great champion. Environmental justice is the same exact thing. You have to take care of the people who don't have the power to take care of themselves. You have to represent them in halls that they sometimes are not represented in. Because if you don't do that, you're not really on a life mission that is worthwhile.
I think everybody cares about the air we breathe. I care for my family, my wife, my children. I care about my neighbors, my community. I care about the 17 million people that live in Southern California, and I work every day to try and bring them cleaner air to breathe. The South Coast AQMD is a leader, an innovator, an incubator for air pollution controls.
Our mission at the AQMD is really to clean up the air in this basin, to make it the most healthful air people can breathe.
Air quality matters tremendously because it has a direct impact on public health.
When we think about health, there are things that we can control, and there are things that we cannot control. We can change our diet, we can exercise more, but you cannot change the air that you breathe.
The other day, it had just rained, and I was walking to class, and I noticed I could see the mountains. I didn't realize you could see the mountains from where I was, and I had been there for months. So If you grow up around here, you're used to smoggy days and you're used to everything being like this. And you might not necessarily realize it shouldn't be like this.
50 years ago, the smog was so bad here that on the freeways, we'd have 60 and 70 cars crash together in a single accident because they couldn't see each other on the freeway.
Back in the 1950s, when I took the train from Needles to the University of Redlands, there were days that you couldn't see 200 yards because of smog. We have very few smog days today.
The political commitment that this country has made to clean air has been a public health triumph. The regional air pollutant concentrations have come down consistently over the last 40 to 50 years.
We really are pleased with the progress, and I think most Southern Californians feel it in terms of the air they breathe or being able to see the mountains on more days of the year.
There's a number of people now who say, "What are you doing? The air's okay. I live on the west side of Los Angeles and it's fine." But it's not fine for everybody.
We wake up in the morning, and usually in California there is a blue sky, but we don't really understand that there are places, hot spots in Southern California, and where I am at right now in Boyle Heights is one of those places where the air is not that good. It's always been a problem because of the proximity to the city of Vernon and also all the traffic that goes through here.
This area here is known as the diesel death zone. We're bordered on the west by refineries and rail yards. We're bordered on the south by the Port of Long Beach, north by the 405 freeway, and to the east by the 710 freeway.
Todos nosotros en esta familia tenemos problemas de salud, especialmente problemas respiratorios. Todos tenemos asma y es muy frustrante para mí como madre no poder ayudarle.
About 7 years ago, I began to experience a breathing problem. It got so bad that going from my bed to the bathroom was a 2-stop trip. That gave me a first-hand experience with what it's like to have asthma or some other respiratory disorder caused by air pollution.
Southern California's air today is actually the worst in the nation. The fact is that according to the best estimates, nearly 5,000 Southern Californians die prematurely each year due to air pollution. That's clearly unacceptable by anybody's standards.
While we're sitting here doing this interview, 15 people will die today from pollution-related illnesses. 15 died yesterday, 15 died the day before, and 15 will die tomorrow. So it's never fast enough, and it's never enough for those people. So the job continues. It's a job that must be continued for some time.
Tantos vecinos que ya hemos despedido, que han sido impactados por el cáncer. My biggest fear is that I get cancer and I wouldn't be able to see my kids, my children's kids.
Children are getting sick as a result of exposures to air pollution that are occurring right now.
We see at our clinic children every day who are suffering from asthma, and many of them have asthma that is not under control. I actually had a patient that died of asthma. He was this adorable young child. His mother had severe asthma, his aunt had severe asthma.
If people keep doing this stuff, we won't be able to breathe, and it'll be hard for us to live our lives. And if we can live our lives, then we can start a new generation.
We've known for years that air pollution will trigger an asthma attack in a child with asthma. What we didn't know was that it actually can affect lung growth and actually cause asthma.
I was born in LA County. I moved all around there when I was a baby, and because of that, I have asthma now, and a lot of my friends have asthma.
By the time they graduate from high school, we see almost a 5-fold increase in rates of abnormal lung function from the cleanest communities to the dirtiest communities. There's increasing evidence that local exposure right around major roadways increase the risk of chronic disease, and there's no regulatory framework for that. You can't put a school near a major freeway, but you can put in a major traffic corridor near a school.
The largest portion of pollution in our basin are mobile sources. When you look at the whole stage, from drilling to exploration, from extracting that oil from the ground in a foreign country somewhere, causing pollution, then to take that oil on a super tanker that crosses the ocean from a satellite, you can see the trail of pollution coming from the Middle East all the way to the United States. That ocean liner sits there off the port and burns that fuel, which spreads and disperses throughout the region. And the next stage is to transport that to the refineries. Then from the refinery, you need those large diesel tankers to take it to the gas station. That's where you, the consumer, are able to put your money in it and get that. These impact, there's a direct relationship to the number of premature deaths in our basin.
180,000 trucks operating in an inner city core put out the same pollution as 1 million passenger cars. So what that would tell me is, do we want to target the truck application as the biggest contributor to pollution?
If you're in an area of bad pollution near a freeway or a busy road, you're inhaling nitric oxides, carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, and if it's diesel, they're particulate matter, which not only goes in your system, but goes in your lungs, your organs, and in your cells.
There are two main components of smog. There's ozone pollution, and then there's particulate matter. Sometimes it confuses people to talk about ozone pollution, because when they think of ozone and the environment, they think of the ozone layer disappearing over Antarctica. Ozone is good up high, but it's not good close to Earth. It's a strong oxidant, which means that it can oxidize respiratory tissue, and that causes an inflammation kind of like sunburn. Then there's also particulate matter, and that's like what we see. So that's the brown haze over Los Angeles.
On polluted days, if you get out and exercise outdoor, you can breathe in 5, 10, even 15 times the amount of air that you would if you were sitting at home without exercising.
All the people in the gym doing weights, as you breathe, you're inhaling emissions from those cars, those trucks, those airplanes. Most of those gyms are near freeways or busy streets, in the middle of commercial areas.
My little sister is in elementary school right now. She's in kindergarten, and the playground of the school is very close to a freeway. There have been studies that show that children, especially, for example, playing on sports teams in areas where the pollution is very bad, they have negative pulmonary function just from something that ought to be beneficial and good for them. I think it just seems really unjust to me that just because of where we live, we're at a higher risk.
Some of our early findings suggest that even short-term exposure to the type of pollution that we find along busy freeways can activate genes in the brain that are genes that we associate with cancer.
There is preliminary proof that when a pregnant woman breathes, the PM particles that are microscopic transmit through her bloodstream to the fetus, causing possible brain damage. That's scary stuff. Can't let that happen. We have to grapple with our energy source pollution. The transportation of goods from our ports to our retailing establishments is a major problem which has got to be handled.
If we look at the Twin Port complex, it is by far our largest source of air pollution.
These ports that serve us, Long Beach and Los Angeles, the harbors, import about 40 to 44% of the nation's imported goods. tremendous center of commerce.
As the containers leave the port and travel by rail and truck, the air pollution from the locomotives and trucks goes directly into the communities along the freeways and the rail lines. And a lot's being done to what we call green the ports. But in spite of that progress, a lot more needs to be done. We need to be thinking of creating a zero-emission goods movement system. And it needs to start at the ports.
I know that the economy has got to be considered. And I know that you got to put people before economy. So it's just a horrific balancing act. And we're continually trying to work on that.
A lot of the freight trains that are out there, that's also one of the largest sources of pollution, specifically in areas such as downtown Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Riverside.
This particular rail yard was found to be the most toxic of the 18 major rail yards in the state. Not just by a little bit, but by almost double. And to clean this up, to make our city safe in terms of quality of the environment is a very important part of my mission.
Well, the railroad facility behind us, ICTF terminal, was built in 1986. Right behind this railway trains right here behind me, there are low-income housing, senior citizen housing, and a school within a quarter of a mile of a major rail facility. This used to be a wildlife area for kids to play in. They're cheating us out of quality of life. That's what we're being cheated out of, quality of life. And that's what we want. Everybody thinks they can dump anything they want into West Long Beach. We're not a third world country, and we damn well gonna fight back.
Clean air certainly is a right. On a personal level, I'm very involved because I think it's a matter of justice. And I think that the tragedy is when certain communities, because of their income background, or they may not have the same education, are taken for granted. You see there where the abuse is more rampant. People think they can dump things. People think they can have different types of industry that will not have an impact or will not be contested.
I think we have the same right that everybody else, the right to breathe.
It's really a human rights issue. We need, more than we need shelter, we need clean air, and we need clean water. You know, I would even go to say that there should be an amendment in our Constitution promising those things to people if we're really serious about a democracy.
Even from a government perspective, you have to look at what are the health costs. What does it really cost us in increasing health concerns or medical bills versus the cost of reducing that pollution? Green transportation solutions can have a major impact on pollution reduction, you know, not only here in Southern California, but globally. There are no technology barriers today. It's really just moving those technologies into commercialization, putting these vehicles in the hands of masses to get the sheer volume out there. And all with the intention of producing these vehicles that will reduce our carbon footprint, so we can have these solutions that really have a global impact on this planet.
I believe that to eliminate air pollution is a goal that is attainable. And I think we have the resources. I think we have the initiatives, and I think that we have the people, the will of the people to do that.
Sometimes we talk about clean air as a goal. It really needs to be a passion for Southern Californians. If you asked me 30 years ago when I started in the air pollution field whether or not we would see the progress that we've had to date, including some of the innovative technologies that are being developed right here in Southern California, we might have been pessimistic. But I can tell you from 30 years' experience, we shouldn't be. We should be optimistic. And it's a matter of the community just pulling together.
There are no magic bullets for protecting people from the health effects of air pollution.
It is that personal responsibility and involvement that will help to create the momentum towards healthful air.
You know, it's about shifting the way that we think about everything that we do, and it's like a worldview shift.
Our kids are going to live with what we leave them. And if we don't leave them something good, they're going to be worse off than we are. So we got to start now to change it.
I guess if I had a message to, you know, people in power, corporations and politicians and stuff, it'd basically be, you know, live as if our future matters. Live as if the future of my generation matters, because I don't want to grow up in a world that the air we breathe is toxic. I don't want my children or my grandchildren to grow up in that type of world.
I think we all need to demand better air quality. Companies will behave responsibly if we make them.
It isn't just that we just came on this earth, but we have a responsibility to keep it clean and to encourage people to do that. And I think the religious communities can play a great role in keeping our environment clean.
It's time for all the faith communities out there to partner with us at AQMD with the neighborhoods to clean up our air here in Southern California so it's safe and healthy for everyone. We can come together and save Southern California and make it the beautiful place it was meant to be.
The people in the senior citizen homes have a role. The everyday worker has a role. And the children definitely have a role. This is everybody's endeavor. And you got to get us all involved.
This movie I've seen many times, and every time it gives me an overwhelming sense of responsibility in the end. And I'm not sure how you feel about it, but I hope you share a little bit of that feeling. I want to thank and acknowledge that our principal, Ms. Tracy Cahulia, is here with us. Thank you for coming. And she is available for to be part of our discussion as needed, so thank you for coming. Also here with us are two board members, the president of our board, Mr. Carlos Silberg. Thank you. And another board member, Ms. Laura Chartier. Thank you for coming too. We are aware of the other two, Ms. Goldberg and Ms. Casales. We are. So thank you all for coming again. What I would like to do next is to I don't think I need to really say this, but I will just begin our discussion with the reason that we're here today is because there is strong evidence that going to school near a freeway has potential negative impacts on children's health. Many of us strongly believe that we all can make a difference in this school. We think it's an amazing school. I have 3 children here, and I am very happy about it and very proud of it. But the school can maybe be we believe it can be an even more amazing school. So with that, I would like to introduce our, we are very close to the freeway, for those of you who are not exactly sure, but we are very close to the freeway. really close. And as to particulars about that and what it means, please, we can ask our guest speakers. They'll be in a better position to answer. So let me introduce our speakers today, or the leaders of our discussions. Dr. Philip Fine. He's currently a planning and rules manager at AQMD. Prior to transferring to this position, he served for many years as the atmospheric measurement manager at AQMD, overseeing the AQMD ambient network for over 35 air monitoring stations. He's responsible for a lot of field activities of numerous special air monitoring research projects, focusing on air toxics and the local impacts of air pollution. Has a lot of research interests in the past in particulate pollution and health effects. He's had his PhD from Caltech. And Dr. Zhu, who joins us from UCLA, the Department of Environmental Health Sciences, where she is an assistant professor. She has a lot of interest in research in the field of environmental exposure assessment, aerosol science, quantitative exposure risk assessment on vehicle emissions, ultrafine particles, and how all that relates to health. She's interested in human exposure, near roadways. She's been involved in modeling emissions and transport and what happens to these particles in the air, in the outdoor air near roadways and in the indoor environment as a result of road emissions. So if you don't mind, Dr. Fine and Dr. Zhu, if you can come up here, and I would like to encourage every single one of you to ask as many questions as you can. That's what they're here for. They know that, and they will be happy to take your questions and take it from there.
First, thank you very much for coming tonight. Very interesting to see that, and appreciate you sharing your expertise. I was just curious, they mentioned it in the movie, and there's been some conversation about SB 352 that was passed in 2003, saying that they couldn't build any new schools near a freeway. Did something change? Was there some new technology? What happened in 2003 that made them say, okay, no more schools, no more new schools within 500 feet of a freeway?
Nothing changed. There was evidence that came out from a lot of the studies that, that Dr. Zhu here conducted and myself back at that time that showed these high levels of certain pollutants next to the roadway. So the state, passed those regulations. Now it says you can't put a school next to a busy roadway or a freeway like that unless you mitigate the impacts, and people are still, struggling with that, and school districts are still looking for ways to mitigate. There have been some efforts with filtration and things like that, but nothing's changed between now and then. It didn't do anything for existing schools, obviously, and so that's one challenge we still have, is what do you do with the schools that are already there? And then different school districts have taken that. Some have adopted even wider buffer zones for new construction. Some have looked more to the mitigation. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but I don't see anything changing from then to now. We still know that the being next to a roadway in itself leads to these health effects.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Phil just said. The evidence, the amount of data that got published in the literature and become evidence growing over that past decade. Actually, I have some quick slides I want to just go over with you quickly. So this is a slide just basically summarize some recent studies done near roadways showing near roadway health effects. And there's tons of literature in this kind of area, and I only pick up some of most relevant studies done in Southern California and for children and for school children go to school near roadways. Some of the studies was done by UCLA School of Medicine. Dr. Rob McConnell's group, and who is also featured in that movie, we just saw. So there's growing body of literature evidence to show that near roadway there's a clear health effects for people living, working, or going to school close to roadways. And what we found later on, this is the paper published around in 2002, it basically shows, I guess this is one of the first piece of evidence, among the first piece of evidence showing what is really going on with pollutant profiles near roadways. Before this paper was published, there are existing studies showing people living close to roadways, having higher risk to have various cancer for health effects. And our study, we use measurements, use data to show when you go across the freeway. This is a study done near the 405 freeway, where 0 here is, if I can find my mouse, if 0 here is where the 405 is. So we measure upwind of the 405 and go across the 405 and get to the downwind side. Well, what you can see from here, I don't know why see here is there's a sharp concentration gradient for the typical pollutants coming out from tailpipe. And the concentration gradient is very sharp and the levels across the freeway is very high. And this is one of the pieces of information that California Air Resource Board and later on US EPA based upon to define where the hot zone, sort of the spatial impact of major highways are. And this is one of the study contributing to that regulatory decisions that no more new schools should be built within 500 feet within a major freeway.
So we're talking 100, 200 meters away.
Can we hand you the mic?
Sure. So we're talking 100 or 200 meters away. What effect does that wall that was extended up there have, a year or two ago? How much of that particulate matter comes up and over the wall?
It does come up and over. There's been a few studies that look at the impact of a wall like that, as well as I think also here the freeway is elevated, which will also have a different effect. Some of the studies I've seen have shown that it does help, especially the closer you are to the wall. But if you can imagine, the further away from the wall you go, the less impact the wall actually has on the levels. And some studies have actually shown that it basically just delays the point of maximum impact of the particles. So instead of being right next to the freeway, it's a little bit further down. Some studies have said it's still lower at that other point. Other studies have shown it can even be higher. So there's still a lot of work to do. We have we're funding 3 ongoing research studies looking at that exact thing. So we can provide advice to Caltrans, whoever is building these roadways, of the best configurations to help mitigate this exposure. We're also looking at tree lines, different types of trees, size of the tree to see if there's any benefit from that. Those are ongoing studies right now.
When I grew up, when I was in elementary school in the 1950s, like those pictures showed, I lived in the San Fernando Valley, and there was no 100 meter, 200 meters. The entire valley looked like you saw in those pictures. And when I was in the playground, my lungs were in pain from the smog. And you couldn't see the hills or the mountains anywhere around the valley. So I guess for me, I look at this now and I go, my God, it is so much better than it ever was back in those days. But we couldn't get away. We couldn't go 100 meters away and get away from the smog.
Yeah, so one of the distinctions that the movie did make subtly is that there's a big difference between what we would call regional pollution and localized pollution. So the regional pollution are the things that were mentioned in the movie, the ozone and the particulate matter, and these are the things that are much worse as you go inland and are in the valley, San Fernando Valley or Riverside, San Bernardino. Those are some of the worst areas in the country for those pollutants. In fact, those pollutants aren't very high next to roadways. In fact, ozone decreases next to a roadway. There's some chemistry that goes on. And you can see even on Yifang's plot here, this top red line would be the way that we would measure particulate matter, which is a little bit of an impact, but we're talking a few percentage, not a factor of 5 or 10 higher. So what we're talking about next to roadways, and maybe because everything else got so clean, that's why we found these other localized impacts, are these other types of pollutants that you see on Dr. Chu's chart. And unfortunately, many of these are unregulated. Like carbon monoxide is regulated, but the cars have gotten a lot cleaner when it comes to carbon monoxide, so even this higher level is still below most health standards. Black carbon is something that comes primarily from diesel emissions, diesel trucks. And that is known in the state of California to be a carcinogen. And it actually drives all the cancer risk in the basin whenever we do our studies. So that's another thing. It's not regulated as such in our efforts to reduce diesel emissions. And then the big one here, which you can kind of see on the left, is particle number. Sorry for taking over your slide. Is particle number. Now that we know is very elevated next to roadways and other sources like airports. Again, this is the very smallest particles. We call them ultrafine particles, not fine particles like the particle mass you see here. And those particles, you know, are still being studied. There is a lot of suggestion that they're causing health effects above and beyond what particulate matter would cause. Again, they're not regulated. So out of an abundance of caution in many cases, we have identified these high levels next to roadways and are trying to work towards doing things about it, but there's not a lot of regulatory muscle we have to do much about it. As an agency, we don't have control over land use decisions. We can make recommendations, we can write guidance documents, same with the state and the federal government. We can't tell a city or a school district you can't put a school there. We just don't have that kind of regulatory authority. But we try to let people know. And we do have other programs. The best way to reduce this, obviously, is to reduce the tailpipe emissions on the freeway, because that not only helps the localized impacts, it helps the regional problems, it helps everything. So a lot of our efforts are focused on that, how to get the cleaner cars on the road and trucks on the road.
So let me ask about mitigation measures, because obviously the school's here and the freeway's there, and we're not really either of them. I mean, it's actually, El Marino was here in the 50s, and the freeway was built in the 60s, so we were here first, but that didn't really help us when they put the road up. So in terms of what can we do here now, you know, and obviously it's going to cost, I imagine, but would anything help in terms of mitigating daily exposure in individual classrooms, or in this room here, or in the offices for the, you know, the adults that are here, etc.? Do you have any ideas about that, and the level or the range of possible mitigation measures, maybe from, well, this is really cheap and this is really super expensive kind of ideas?
Again, we're very careful to say that the solution isn't a mitigation measure. The solution is to go to the source and reduce the emissions, because it's always
electric cars. I know
it's always going to be somewhat of a band-aid. But as far as band-aids go, we've done a lot of work on filtration, as many of you may have heard. We've traditional kind of filtration that you get in a heating and air conditioning system, like you may have at home, and you put those filters you buy at Home Depot into your system. They're very similar to the ones that go into schools. They're pretty good at filtering out the very large particles. Even a bit of the PM2.5 if you buy the $10 one instead of the $3 one. But they're not very good at these ultrafine particles. And also the diesel particles tend to be very small in the range of ultrafines as well. So when you look at these kind of off-the-shelf filters you get in the store, you know, there's some effect, but it's not very effective at the very small particles. So we launched a few studies where we looked at these high-efficiency filters specifically for school applications. And we had some really good early results that led to several subsequent full implementation programs where we have put these filters, or planning to, or in the process of putting them in, outfitting entire schools with these filters. Where we do that depends a lot on where we can find the funding. We basically administer these programs based on different pots of money. A lot of them are geographically based, so we can't just pick any school we want. But where we can, we've been involved in these programs. And you can get up to 80 to 90% removal in the classroom of both the ultrafine particles and the black carbon particles, which would be the diesel particles. So again, we're doing like 40 schools down near the ports in San Pedro and Wilmington. We've already done like 6 or 7 schools in West Long Beach. We have a few schools in Boyle Heights, a few schools in San Bernardino. And to the extent we could find funding, we try to do it as many places as we can. It does not help when the kids are out on the playground, obviously. So it's only when they're inside. These filters, this solution only helps for particles, gaseous pollution, whether it's carbon monoxide or some of the organic gases that come off of vehicles. It does not address that. We tested some of that out. It's just a lot less cost effective. We still have some work to do on that technology. But we did see good success in schools for the particles. Now, it really, cost-wise, it really depends on the type of heating and air conditioning system that you already have in the school, if you have one at all. The simplest solution is if you have any type of heating and air conditioning system that already has a filter, a spot for a filter, you can basically change that out relatively inexpensively. You go from a $3 filter to maybe a $100 filter, or worse, a $200 filter, but it'll last a year. So per classroom, a couple $100 versus $3 or $4, $8. It's, you know, it's pretty cost effective. If you do not have a forced air system, then it starts getting more expensive because you have to put a standalone unit in. Those can go anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 to $4,000 per classroom, plus the cost of changing filters. And there's a couple other solutions that aren't quite as effective, but we can use if we need to. And you know, some school districts we are a little reluctant at first. They're worried about the maintenance, but we've kind of added to the programs. We've added like smart thermostats. We've added motion sensors, so we've gained a little bit of like energy efficiency in these classrooms, which has helped a bit. We also have these sensors that go in the ducts that tell you when the filter needs to be changed. So instead of just changing it like they do now every 6 weeks or 12 weeks on a regular schedule, now you only change it as needed, and these are much more expensive. You don't want to throw out a filter that has a good, some lifetime left in it. So with that, we're saving some of these districts a lot of staff time in changing out the filters because they're going out a lot less often. And in fact, these filters last longer than the traditional filters. So it's been a pretty good success, but really, to do a school, this is a relatively small school, and to do it right, which is assess the school, figure out how to do it correctly, come up with a cost estimate, and do the full job with thermostats and everything, you might be $50,000 to $100,000 overall, and plus some ongoing costs.
Just to tag on that, does that include air conditioning installation?
No, that would be a school that already had existing infrastructure in that area. To do that, it actually can be cost effective if a school was already thinking of or planning to put in heating and air conditioning. And they can do that with these filters in mind. You save a lot of money because you just design it around the filters, and all you have to do is keep a stock of the filters around.
Has that been done?
In one school, it hasn't been done yet. There's one school in Boyle Heights that is slated to get a new, it doesn't have one now, but an actual air conditioning system.
But you said that there were standalone systems as well?
Yeah, standalone systems, if you don't have any heating or air, then you can use the standalone systems, but the initial cost might be $3,000 or $4,000 per unit.
Can it work just with the, not like a scrubber, but it's not air conditioning, but it's a heater, which will remove circulate air anyway.
As long as you have forced air, it doesn't need to have an air conditioning unit, it just needs some kind of forced air.
I believe in this school, every classroom is equipped with heating, which can move the air around.
If it's a forced air system, that's correct. If it's just a radial system, no. But,
just a clarification. If the doors are left open, it gets very hot. Most of the time it is hot. How would a standalone unit work to filter air that is constantly coming through the doors and the windows?
Much less effectively. They work much more effectively if the more sealed the classroom is, obviously. So that's one reason that a forced air system can be beneficial in air quality if you have these filters in there. Because if you have to leave the windows and doors open, then it's very hard to clean the indoor air, obviously.
And you said that these filters that you have been pilot testing and that have been used in some schools, they're good at filtering out ultrafine particles. Have these been associated with a lot of the health effects that have been observed in children, particularly triggering asthma, causing asthma, and some of the other health effects?
I just came back from the Health Effect Institute annual conference where they did a very extensive literature review on the health effect to ultrafine particle per se. What they found is it's very hard to tease the ultrafine particles away from all the emissions coming out from the tailpipe. So this diagram is showing you here is ultrafine particles and other primary pollutants, tons of air toxics coming out from the tailpipes will all follow this sharp concentration decay. What we cannot measure is all those organic compounds and volatiles that we really cannot measure. So ultrafine particles, whether it is by itself is a major health concern or it's just serving as a tracer for automobile emissions, is still debatable in our field. And there's studies being designed to test hypotheses one way or the other. But what is really showing here, and all the health literature is showing, is the mixture of traffic emissions that is causing health effect. And particles by itself does end up having health effects on their own, but how much percentage of the observed health effects attributable to ultrafines or to other air toxics in the air is something is still ongoing.
Hi. I'd like to know, on the committee we've been having discussions about whether it's worthy to do more measurement, and our consensus thus far has been that we're near the freeway. Let's get on with the mitigation measures that we can. Could you guide us through some of the steps that we would take from here, assuming that we have an active parent group and a devoted faculty and employee group? Where do we go from here?
I mean, Phil mentioned this classroom filtration system, which I think if you can afford and the school districts support it, that's clearly something very beneficial. And if you think about, from exposure's perspective, you really need to think about when a child or children as a whole group going through their daily life at school, where they are and how much time they're spending, their portion of their school time, and what are they doing. When they're sitting, they spend majority of their time, I assume, sitting in their classrooms. So you filter out the pollutant coming into the classroom will significantly cut down their overall exposure when they're at school. But on the other hand, they're also spending times on their playground, even maybe a small, like relatively small portion of their time, but they're doing exercise. So they're exercising, which the movie shows when they exercise, they're breathing in, for every minute they take in more air, so meaning more air pollutions will go into their lung. So you want to think about both, right? And one potential mitigation measure, I don't want to make any promise here, but I think one thing we could possibly explore is the timing where you let the kids go out and exercise. What this plot shows here is the sharp concentration gradients only occurs at the downwind side of the freeway. And we have measured pretty close to the freeway, but it's upwind, and we didn't see much. So even though you're close to the freeway, you have to also look at the wind. You are downwind for the most part of the day when the kids are here at the school. But there is certain time frame. The school starts at what time? 8:30? 8:45? The typical sea breeze in Southern California usually takes time to develop around 10 a.m. also. So it's not fully developed around 10 or 10:30 time frame on a typical Southern California day in the west side of LA. So there may be some time where you can, flexibility that you can play, especially those PE time if the school is flexible and can work out a schedule where you put kids to play when the wind is not fully developed, the school is actually upwind for a short time, and then the wind will develop, then you become downwind for the rest of the day until the school dismiss in the early afternoon where you're all downwind. So there is some, local meteorology. You don't even have to measure air quality. You measure local meteorology, you will get a pretty good idea about when typically the wind will start to develop, and the school can maybe do some time planning work to use this meteorology to do some simple mitigation measures, especially for outdoor PE time.
Of course, one of the tricks here is sometimes the wind will disperse the pollutants. When you've got a situation like this where the freeway is elevated and so on. But the movie said that it was 15-fold greater when exercising. So 15 minutes in the playground is equivalent to 3 hours and 45 minutes sitting in a classroom. So really the big danger zone, no matter how much filtration you do in the classroom, the real danger is exercising in the playgrounds. That's what used to pain my lungs in school, was the playgrounds. So maybe we need to transport the children to a different playground and have them play there.
I just want to follow up on that. And based on the curve that, I know this is not just your work, but other scientists have duplicated this kind of work. So I just want to put that out there, that this is not just Dr. Zhu's work. The curve shows that between 0 to 300 feet, is that right? I'm sorry, meters away from the freeway, by the time we reach about 300 meters, we're down to background levels. So it's really high between, say, 0 to, say, 100 meters. The curve seems so sharp that based on that, it seems to say that every foot away from the freeway matters and will drop the exposure of the children dramatically. Is that correct? And if that is so, then perhaps just positioning the PE a little bit further away from the freeway, given that we are as close to the freeway as about 70 feet. That's how close we are. So given that curve, 70 feet is really right there at the peak pretty much, or a little bit past it.
This is without a sound wall, and this is it is elevated. But again, a sound wall can change those characteristics. You might get the highest concentration at 50 meters or something after the sound wall has deflected the wind over. So some studies have shown that. So that's a possibility, and we have some ongoing research studies to look at that. Those research studies are also looking at mitigation. So to answer your question about what you can do about mitigation, it's not near term, but you can kind of wait. Our studies are, might be a year away from having results, but hopefully they'll find that perhaps planting certain types of trees in between have some good effects, and talk about what sound walls do, and maybe a bigger sound wall or more sound walls or things like that could have effects. So it's not as simple as this. And the other thing, I'm sure Dr. Xu could tell you, and at certain times of the day, usually when the kids aren't in school, early in the morning, this 100 meters or 300 meters can actually be about 1,500 meters when the air is really stagnant. So it's not always this simple. So, usually that may not happen, but when you're talking in the morning, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and the air is really stagnant, the sea breeze hasn't picked up yet, it might extend further. This represents kind of an average over some ideal wind conditions, but other studies have shown a much larger zone of influence. And one follow-up, one thing, you still ask me, what are your next steps? If you wanted to pursue the filtration route, and we've worked primarily with one company to do all these things, and as a government agency, I don't want to endorse them or give them business, but we've tested a lot of different filters. We've had open testing programs for every manufacturer to bring their stuff to us, and we've tested it out. They're still the only ones up to now, we hope to find more, but the only ones up to now that meet the specs that we initially achieved in our pilot studies. So those are the only ones we can use at this point. I could give you the name. You can look on our website and get the name. Nothing's stopping you from calling them, seeing if they'll come by. They charge us to do an assessment of a school. They may or may not charge you, and at least you'll have a quote in hand of what it would take. So, you know, I'm not endorsing them, but that's one step you can take, and that might be a good first step. Okay.
And if we're going to do some seeking of funds, do you have any direction for us to go for seeking these hundreds of thousands of dollars?
Again, ours tend to be, you know, the monies that we've been spending don't actually originate through our normal operating revenue. They come from penalty funds, mitigation funds. You know, one is a settlement fund from the ports that we're administering. Another is the reformulated gasoline Unocal settlement. So, in each of those things, they have very specific geographical areas that they represent. So we don't have money that we can just say, okay, we're going to do this school right now. So you can keep an eye on our funding programs. We do have, sometimes we have open our request for proposals, and if we did have money for projects like this, and obviously we know who you are, so we might even let you know about it if it was something that would work. That's from us. I'm not sure of other organizations or funding agencies, or whether, you know, one approach is just to raise money like you'd raise money for any other school project. Try to find someone who's you know, you can get a corporate sponsor. I don't know.
What about the contract?
Good old-fashioned trees, right? Do they help at all, like the type of trees, the amount of trees that we can have around something?
Maybe Dr. Zhu has looked at the studies more recently than I have. I've seen a few studies that have shown some effects for ultrafines, and it's very dependent on the configuration, the type of tree, how dense the leaves are, and we hope that the studies we're doing now will identify them as a potential mitigation measure. A lot of people assume they are and are going in that direction, but we'd like to have some data before we recommend it to anybody. So we're looking at it. There's only been a few studies that I'm aware of that have actually gotten data on that, and varying degrees of effectiveness. Some showed pretty high effectiveness, some showed not that high. So,
yeah, the literature on that, some better war or vegetarian, some better war near freeways, and how much mitigation that could possibly offer. EPA has done some study on their own, and they have published a couple of papers on it, but as Dr. Dr. Fine just mentioned, it's not strong evidence yet. We're actually planning to do some studies as we're speaking to really comparing just some bear war by itself and some bear war plus vegetarian. We call it vegetated some bear war. There's sections, if you drive along the 405, you will see this is actually where the UCLA graduate student housings are. And they're in the same situation with you guys. They're just right next to the 405. And so section of those sunbearer wars, there's just pure sunbearer war. And some of the sunbearer wars start to grow vegetation on it. And when I drove by, I thought, wow, this is a perfect site to do a comparison study. So we're in the process to trying to collect more data, you know, along the line. I mean, if the school is willing to work with us, we'll be more than happy to bring our instruments out and to work with you guys and collect some data and maybe even help you to figure out if there's any possibility that the wind, the meteorology, and the timing of the day has an effect on the pollutant levels on the school ground. And we'll be more than happy to work with you guys on that.
Thank you very much for that. Actually, that goes into the question that I had, which basically one of the efforts that we're seeking are mitigation, air filtration, and things that are going to be obviously where we're going to have to be coming up with resources in order to install this. A second question, and I think a little bit more immediate question for me would be: are there personnel resources or some sort of support that we could get from certain professional areas that would be able to sit and work with us on advisement on our current operations right now? Basically, for example, the location of our youngest students, for example, where they are right now currently housed, is close to the freeway as you can be. But I have heard in the past as well that because of that sound wall and because of the height of the freeway, that it was actually, you know, worse where we are in the office here. But the closer you got in, it was almost as if it was skipping over them. And I really don't know these things. And before we started changing everybody's location and everything like that, I would really love to be able to sit down with somebody who would look at our school, look at, like you said, with the meteorological kinds of weather patterns here, finding out those kinds of things, or looking at where our green space is. Is there something like that out there?
Well, the sound barrier wall and the elevation of the freeway and how the pollutant profile look like. On top of that is local meteorology changes from day to day. There's general pattern, but there's also day-to-day variability. I would think to answer exactly whether it's close to the roadway, the 405, and versus a certain distance away. You know, if you have options, you're thinking moving the kindergartens from one classroom to another classroom, the best way would be just take some data. I mean, we can help you to collect some data and, you know, to really help understanding where is high, where is low on the school.
Because I'm assuming it's going to be high everywhere, because I think all of us, essentially most of us are within the 500.
Right, yes, you're right. But look at the curve, there's certain...
So is there a curve that could be taken as far as data for this specific area, or does that not really matter? Should we? Because that goes back to our original question of, do we spend some time trying to collect data for our specific site? And does that help us in our decision making here, or can we rely on generalized patterns of the data that's out there and published in research?
Yeah, this is a good question, because it's really a little bit special because the sound barrier wall, and most of those studies published showing those curves were done on open freeways, as far as I know. And they actually have nice mega studies just published last year. I think they're showing people pulling together 50 or to 70 those near roadway studies worldwide, and they're showing similar decay and similar profile around the world. So it's not just Los Angeles, not just California, but how does this particular sound barrier wall and this particular elevation of the freeway change the spatial concentration, pollutant concentration profiles? Here, I think it may be worth looking into.
Hi. I have a child in first grade here, and my family, me and my wife, agonized over this exact issue when we decided to come here. But after speaking with our pediatrician and speaking with a doctor at USC who published one of these studies, we felt okay about coming. But to this question about measuring the impact of it, I understand there are some pretty inexpensive tools or meters that we can use to measure the particulate matter in our classrooms. Is there something you can recommend as a start? I know we want to jump to the mitigation measures, but maybe that's a good way to see if our mitigation measures are improving. If we measure now and then measure after we put the mitigation measures in place.
Depends what you mean by inexpensive, because
I saw something for $200 on Amazon.
Yeah, that probably won't get you what you want. The cheapest particle counter that will get you ultrafine particles I know of is about $7,000 or $8,000. But you can, you don't necessarily need to buy one. You could rent them, borrow them. That's what a lot of people do.
I wanted to find out how, for example, the schools in the Boyle Heights area, they're in a similar situation. You know, we're not in the Port of LA, so they're in a similar situation in the sense that they're close to a freeway. How did HMD become involved with them? Was it something that was started from the community? Was it something that HMD particularly focused on an area? Was it a collaboration between the two?
We have a program we call the Clean Communities Plan, and it's much broader than just near roadway exposures. It has to do with a lot of other environmental justice issues. So this program just kicked off a couple years ago, and we have 2 kind of pilot communities where we're kind of testing out this approach to dealing with air quality problems. And San Bernardino was one, and Boyle Heights was another. And one of the elements of this multifaceted outreach program, education program, mitigation program was figuring out what the communities were concerned about and then trying to help them move forward in solving those problems. So when there was a opportunity made through this UNICAL settlement fund at the state level, so the communities were interested in applying for filters. So we help them with the proposal. So we're kind of a technical advisor on the project now, kind of a go-between between the funding agency, or the fund, and the community, and we're working kind of in a technical role to make sure the project goes forward okay. And that's happening both in Boyle Heights and in San Bernardino. So it started with them, but we had a lot of suggestions about the proposal and what they might try to do with it.
Just a point of clarification in my mind, being about 3 miles from the beach here, the school really doesn't need a lot of air conditioning, if any. But the point you made about having to close all the doors and windows for a filtration system to work, then what we're really talking about here is providing not only heating but cooling to every classroom. Is that correct?
Pretty much, if you're going to have the filters working, full time in the summer or the warmer months, then yeah, you need some way to cool the classroom too. If you're going to have the windows and doors closed.
My question is, well, it seems like no matter what, the school is here, freeway is there, but the wall seems like make a huge difference. Is there any better wall that we can build? The reason I said is I grew up in Japan. Because of the space, I lived in the apartment right next to the freeway as well. But I noticed there's a lot of freeway has this really big wall and arched in toward the freeway. It's almost like half tunnel. And something like that is effective. I'm not quite sure, but it seems like a wall makes a big difference. If we could build a little better wall, maybe that makes a huge difference.
That's one of the things we're looking at in our research studies right now. The better your wall is, the worse the exposures for the people on the road are. You can build a tunnel around the roadway, and that would be very effective, but then you're going through a tunnel. But
how about the little arch, like that, the little curved in?
Yeah.
Is that?
We don't know yet. We don't know the answer to that, but we hope to get some answers in some of the studies that we're doing.
I know this is old news, but when the freeway was built initially, and later when they expanded it, they built it next to the school. Is there any liability that Caltrans incurs? Because a long time ago, I looked at the maps that they used to decide how they were going to expand the freeway, and there was a notation only of El Marino Park. There was no indication that there was a school here. And I feel that usually when they do any kind of a project, they have to look at what's around the community, and they were supposed to indicate whether or not there were any schools nearby. But the maps that I saw indicated no school. They indicated only a park. If they made a mistake and built the freeway out towards us, not realizing there was a school, do they hold any financial culpability?
I can't speak to where that liability lies. It seems like it was in the 60s, or if there is any liability. I can speak a little bit to the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. So when there's a project such as that, now at least, and I'm not sure how far back the different provisions of that act go, when you do any type of project, you have to estimate the environmental impacts of that project. And one of the 9 or 10 things you have to look at is air quality and what exposures, additional exposures you will be creating. You also have to come up with potential mitigation for those exposures. You're not required to do a lot of that, but it's more informational to the public and to the agency who makes the final decision about the project, at least so it's all in the open and people know what the trade-offs are of this project versus the impacts. So at the time, I don't know how, whether people went back that far, but you do have to do that now. That's an unusual case. Usually what you get now is, at least before the state came out with their law, is that school districts want to build schools next to freeways that already exist, or next to refineries, or next to sources that already exist. And currently, CEQA only requires those projects to look at the impact of the school, the project, on the surrounding community. It doesn't look at the impact of the surrounding community on the kids or the people you'll be bringing to that site. We would call that reverse CEQA. And people have talked about that for a while, but currently there's no requirements. If you move a school into a polluted area, that you have to mitigate the increased exposures you're causing, because the school is the project. So we have worked with the state agencies and talked about this. I haven't had a lot of progress, but usually that's the case, not the case where you have a school and then the freeway moves into it, although I know this one might have added a lane or two in the last few years, so.
Yeah, me. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you know what, I just had two things. Can you talk a little bit about the particles? Because I think there's a misconception a little bit amongst us parents. I know we were when this was being discussed in the Yahoo group about just the asthma, and parents were sort of under the impression that if their child didn't have asthma, or as they got older didn't develop asthma, that somehow we weren't being affected by the freeway. I feel like that's sort of out there. And the other thing is, do you think we're crazy for sending our kids to the school right next to the freeway?
Maybe we should start with
that. First question's easier. So there's a lot of effects of particles on the body. We know diesel particles from diesel carry a cancer risk with them, a lung cancer risk. We also know that from large-scale epidemiology studies that the more general regional particles you have in the air, it increases your the mortality of the area. Like the movie said, 5,000 excess deaths a year in Southern California attributable to the particle pollution, and much more nationwide. So, there's a lot of different effects. So just because your kid doesn't have asthma doesn't mean they haven't been affected in some other way, some other health endpoint. A lot of the health endpoints for particles are actually cardiovascular, not pulmonary. And that's what people are finding more recently. So there's a lot of different potential effects. And even 5,000 excess deaths a year is a lot, unacceptable. But you have to put that in context with how many deaths a year you have. So it's not surprising you have some kids, obviously, that don't have any outward effects, because the incremental health risk you're adding, usually when you do it's like 1, 2, 3%. And from a public health perspective, that's huge. There's a huge number of people affected. In a school of this size, might be 1 kid or 2 kids, which is still too many. But that's the way these numbers tend to work. So you wouldn't expect every kid to have the same effects. You're just increasing your risk of a certain outcome by being here. That kind of gets into the next question, which is, obviously you're not crazy for sending your kids here. Everyone deals with risks. Every time when you get in your life, you get in a car, you drive down the freeway, so it's a personal choice. The best you could do is really be informed of what those risks are and understand, the magnitude of those risks. It's not 100% that you have a kid here, they're going to have a health impact. So, it's hard sometimes to even get the number of what that risk is, but you have to put it in context. For instance, we do a very large-scale study. We're just starting the 4th installment of what we call the MATE study, which is an air toxic study across the whole basin. And we look at diesel, we look at all cancer risk from air pollution across the whole basin. And what always comes out of that is that diesel particulate is 80 to 90% of the risk by everyone in the basin. And that it comes out to an average of a cancer risk, your risk of getting cancer over a 70-year lifetime from air pollution is about 1,200 in a million, or 1.2 people for every 1,000 people would contract cancer from living in Southern California. In some areas it's 2 or 3, some areas it's a lot less, but on average about 1.2. But your overall chance of getting cancer out of 1,000, instead of you're adding to 1 or 2 or 3 to it, is about 300 to 400 in 1,000. Because most of us, or not most of us, a good fraction of us will get cancer. So you're adding to that. You're taking that 300 or 400 and you're making it 301 or 302 and 303. But you're also, that 300 is made up of, you know, all the other things you've done in your life, your kids have done in your life to increase their cancer risk. Well, and it all adds up. So if you understand some of these ways that risk is calculated, then people can make better decisions about, you know, what, you know, I mean, if your kid was, if it was a choice of, you know, having your kid go to this school or buy a motorcycle when they were 18, obviously, school's a lot safer, right? So you have to weigh these different risks. Everybody has different levels of
So,
questions.
Just to answer a reverse question, having practiced in the environmental law area for a while, CEQA was enacted in around 1970, right around the same time that the Federal Environmental Protection Act was also passed. So as far as timing for when El Marino and then the 405 was planted first, it was not even a factor. As far as the recent upgrade, they did know about us because I know that there was some communication, I don't know whether it was through the city or through the school, but probably both, about mitigating some of the noise when they were constructing so that some of it was taken place in the summer or after school hours or things like that. So I know that much. But I also know, just taking off my board hat because there's still too many of us in the room to talk board business, but that I was part of a group of parents who got together in January to start a grant writing group, and there's a subgroup of them that were from El Marino. And I think that there's a lot of grant opportunities for a lot of different, you know, whether it's healthy eating or for clean air or whatever, that, you know, the folks that are interested in helping write grants, or maybe some of the folks from this group might want to join that group and help do the research to find grants and help to write them, especially if they require any kind of technical gobbledygook in them. So those are just a couple of factoids and some ideas.
Hey Phil, I just wanted to see if you, because I know a lot of the big epi studies that have been done in the area have really looked at regional effects. And so if you could just sort of give this group an overview of the influence of regional effects versus local effects. Because I would imagine our regional air quality here is fairly good.
Yeah, I mean, with the exception of maybe some Santa Ana days or unusual wind conditions, a few days a year, generally the ozone and PM levels here aren't generally high. I'm talking about PM mass, PM 2.5, the things that we worry about more in either downtown or east of there into Riverside and San Bernardino. So it's good news is that we live in I live in Topanga Canyon, we have fairly clean air on the west side in most days. But that's regional, not local. The local effects, it just matters how close you are to that source. So I don't know if I can specifically say what kind of the relative impacts of the regional pollution versus the local pollution is. Most of the EPI studies that have been done regionally have actually looked at ozone and PM because those are what EPA calls criteria pollutants, and that's primarily what the Clean Air Act deals with, and that's why agencies like ours exist for the most part, and is most of what our job is. These local impacts are relatively recently studied. So a lot of the EPI studies of near roadway exposures do not necessarily look at, can't really Dr. Zhu said, can't really tease out whether it's the ultrafines or some other pollutant from the roadways, but just the fact you live next to a busy roadway or freeway seems to have a kind of a separate set of effects. It seems to be more on lung function, lung development in kids, asthma, onset, asthma, exacerbation, more pulmonary effects. But that's mostly because the people at USC who do that type of research are do more research on pulmonary effects. There hasn't been as many near roadway studies on some of the other types of endpoints. UCLA, Dr. Ritz has done a lot on pregnant women and birth defects. So she's seen some effects of living next to roadways for that. So it's kind of a different set of endpoints that people have looked at for whatever reason near roadways. And I'm sure you can find a few that overlap, but not enough to really give you, like, you know, near roadways 10 times worse than the regional stuff, or vice versa, you know. Yeah.
I mean, epidemiology studies, there's studies looking at regional air pollutants, like PM2.5, and there's classic Harvard 6-city studies where they just look at 6 cities, clean cities, dirty cities, and what they found is people living in dirty cities, they have higher risk to die prematurely comparing to people living in cleaner cities. But they're just treating the people who live in that city as a group with, you know, exposed to whatever the average PM2.5 level in that city. And there's another set of study, we call it near railway health studies, as I showed here. So those studies that listed, it's just a real subset of what has been published. What epidemiologists do in those kind of studies, they typically don't look at specific air pollutants, but they use proximity to roadways as a surrogate for exposures. And some of the studies have tried to use modeling and some measurements to measure, say, NOx or black carbon from traffic emissions, but mainly use it as a surrogate. It's still a surrogate. It may not be the causality factors, may not be the causality components in the emission, tailpipe emission that is really causing the observed health effect, but it's kind of like a tracer to show that when you expose very close to traffic emissions, those are the health effect has been observed for people living near roadways.
That's on the epi studies. On the toxicology side, there's been a lot of work done showing that ultrafine particles, or at least the substance that makes up ultrafine particles itself, these particles are made up of hundreds of chemicals. Those chemicals in the ultrafine particles have been shown to be more toxic than the chemicals in just PM2.5 in general, although there's more of them in PM2.5, but on a per mass basis, they're more toxic in the ultrafines. And then the physical nature of ultrafines, which mean they have a much higher surface area, so there's a much more likely that certain things absorb to the surface of these particles are bioavailable when they go into your body. So they might be a more effective delivery mechanism for certain toxic chemicals, just like, you know, people who take inhalers and they use particle dose in medication now. Because of the high surface area, you can get a quick dose into your lungs. You know, they test those to make sure that those particular particles are not toxic, you would hope. And then the physical particle itself has been shown, when they're really small, as opposed to when they're larger, to actually be able to cross cell membranes and get into the interior of cells and cause cell death. Because of the physical particle itself, which larger particles, your body has other ways of dealing with those larger particles. So on the toxicology side, there's a lot of evidence that the near roadway ultrafine particles may have this extra effect. But going from toxicology in a test tube or even in a mouse or a rat to humans is always difficult.
I have a couple of things to ask, one to ask and one to say, and I want to come here as a parent of children and of my knowledge of the fact that within this room there are parents who have asthmatic children, some actually really sensitive and very actively asthmatic. Some in every classroom there probably are asthmatic children. And so with that in mind, and with the fact that we have vulnerable children here as small as the age of preschoolers to kindergartners and on to 5th grade, would you think we need to do something about it? Or think about doing something about it, seriously? As opposed to just accepting to live with the risks that we live in LA.
And I think there's, we have something like 50% of the population in Los Angeles living within 1 mile of a freeway, and I think I have the numbers on chart, I think in my presentation, which I'm not going to show, but even like 5% of the population in LA within 100 meters of a freeway. So it's something that a lot of people do live with, and a lot of kids live with, and it's something that, is not acceptable. But if I tell you that, you have to take action right away, I'm telling, 1 million people in Los Angeles they need to take action right away.
But is it a bad idea?
Bad idea to take action?
Yeah.
No, anything you can do, especially if you have kids that are asthmatic, it has been shown that, living next to busy roadways increases the risk of an attack. And maybe for those asthmatic kids, which we would call a sensitive population or sensitive receptor, maybe there's certain things that can be done for them, keeping them inside, especially if you have filtration. Even without filtration, there's some natural filtration that classrooms have, even without forced air, that will reduce pollutants. Maybe those are the kids that need to stay further away from the freeway, at least when they're having an attack or susceptible to an attack or pollen season. There's certain things, prophylactic things you can try to do. Again, the solution is getting the vehicles on the roadway should not be emitting these things, and that's not a great answer because it's going to take a long time for that. But
in the meantime, we do have children that are suffering every day, and so with that perspective, that I want to say to the group here that is, from that perspective, we have many of us parents have decided that we do need to really research this a little bit better, find more answers. Having them speak to us today was very helpful. We clearly don't have all the answers. We have a map. We have a lot of information that we can go from. Our group, Advocates for Cleaner Air at El Marino, we formed a website. We are wanting to be a source of information, particularly to parents who have asthmatic children. There is a lot that can be done, as he was saying, things at home, things at school. There's some information there. We would welcome any of you who would like to join our efforts, because clearly it's not a one magic bullet answer. Filtration, air conditioning will take funding, will take effort. I think measurement sounds like a really fine idea, but to just be a laboratory with measurements is not going to satisfy or help the children that are right now suffering from asthma in our school. And so we will love that idea, I think, and we would need to think about it, because it would be fantastic to find out more about how effective filtration and things like that are, and maybe we can look at it from that standpoint. I know that EPA has come up with recent guidelines to have more measurement of pollutants near freeways, because right now we don't really measure pollutants near freeways, is that correct? So maybe that's something we can look into, and maybe this place could be a place where you can measure pollutants near a freeway in a very sensitive group of population, which is our children. And so I don't know if that's something that would be worthy of your thoughts.
Yeah, unfortunately, the pollutants that EPA wants to measure aren't necessarily the ones, well, you can measure, they're talking about the criteria pollutants, so you measure NO2, NOx, PM 2.5. There's a small impact from freeways, but it's not the steep curves that you see for ultrafines and black carbon. Although they encourage everyone in all the states to measure those things also, but there's no regulatory teeth in what we find with that. So informational, yeah, and getting back to what someone said earlier, there may be some reasons to measure pollutants here, but I think the approach of, for a very specific purpose, I used to be the monitoring manager, so people would tell me, I just want monitoring. And there's 100 questions you have to ask before you go out and do a monitoring study. You really need to know why you're monitoring, because you can design the study 15 different ways depending on what you want to get out of it. You know what to monitor, where to monitor, how frequently, how time resolution of the data, how many sites. So identify what you want to get out of the monitoring, and then, and again, if it's try to figure out how this sound wall is affecting concentrations, then you can design a study around that. If you want long-term monitoring, it's a whole different thing. If you're looking at long-term risks, it's different. So again, monitoring is rarely the answer. It usually produces more questions, but in some cases it can get you some answers that you're looking for. But you have to design the study correctly. Just putting a full monitoring station here measuring PM2.5, I can tell you right now that's not going to get you the answer that you're looking for.
I had another question. It just seems that HMB has been fundamental in getting some of these schools support, technical support and resources to get mitigation systems available at the schools, maybe be it a research study. But it seems to me that without AQMD, those schools in Boyle Heights, for example, would not have the filtration system that they have now. Is there anyone that you would recommend we approach at the AQMD, or is there anybody that you can approach on our behalf to try to make a collaboration from our community and AQMD to at least look into the possibility of AQMD supporting our efforts in mitigating the exposure to our children, in the near future?
Well, I can say that we're, through, you talking to me tonight, several emails that have gone back and forth over the past several months, communication through one of our governing board members, we're aware of the desire here. And if there was a pot of money available, we can consider it. Just at the time, right now, it's not. So I don't know if there's anything else you need to do. We're aware, and if something became available, if it's something we consider, we have to be fair. We obviously can't afford to do it in every school everywhere. But I don't know if there's anyone else to go to at this point. As far as technical advice, I could give you my card tonight. If you guys got further along and had questions about, the types of systems, you got to be a little careful. There's a lot of people out there who claim to know how to do this. So.
We've been in touch with some, by doing some research, we know the company that, has worked with LUSC, we know the air conditioning company that has been, working with the Boyle Heights schools. So we know, the resources are available, but it's getting there. We know we have the information, we know the problem is getting to the right place. And I wanted to mention just briefly to all the parents and the teachers and the staff and the board members that are here that we have a statement of support on the back where we're just asking the school district and the school district board for supporting in our community and in our group to learn, to be able to research more on this topic, to be able to even look into the actual, financial components of, such a proposed project, and, getting their support and trying to really make this happen, because I know this is something that has been on parents' minds and on the school mind for many, many, many years, and I think it's time. So we invite everybody to look at the statement of support. On the back, we also have some flyers with information about the meetings that we have every month, and everyone is welcome to that.
We meet on the second Thursday of every month. We have flyers with our website and email address. Please contact us if you want to be part of our efforts. We invite all of you to be part of it. We are very thankful for your time. Thank you very much. I am very sure that we will continue to be in touch with you, each of you, both of you. I want to thank the board members who took the time to be here tonight. And to all the parents, we want you to know that we care. A lot of us care, and we actually really seriously now want to do something about it. I know it's been a topic that's been brought up in the past and it's died, but this time it shall not die because there's too many people on board. So please join us if you can, and we welcome everything you've got to say, and we will include you in everything we're doing. And thanks again to Dr.